Emma Thompson adjusted her expensive silk scarf as she settled into the hard wooden bench at the back of the Manchester courthouse. Her perfectly manicured fingers gripped her designer leather handbag. A gift from her father for her 21st birthday just last month. The morning light filtered through the tall, arched windows, creating patterns of gold and shadow across the polished floor. She had never been inside a courthouse before today. The whole experience felt fun and uncomfortable to her. The stern-faced security guards, the formal atmosphere, even the way people whispered in hushed tones. It all made her feel out of place. But her childhood friend Lucy had begged her to come for moral support during what promised to be a difficult hearing. Emma glanced round the room, taking in the mix of people waiting for their cases to be called. There were families huddled together, lawyers in dark suits shuffling through papers, and court officials moving about with practiced efficiency. She felt grateful for her comfortable upbringing, which had kept her far away from places like this. When the bailiff called the next case, Emma watched as various people moved toward the front of the courtroom. Among them was a young man, who immediately caught her attention, though not for reasons she would later be proud of. James Williams was 17 years old, with kind eyes and a quiet confidence that spoke of maturity beyond his years. But Emma didn't notice these qualities at first. Instead, her gaze fixed on his worn sneakers, the kind that had clearly seen better days. His jacket was clean but faded, and his jeans had a small patch near the knee where they had been carefully mended. His hair was neatly cut, and his posture was straight, but Emma's privileged background had taught her to make quick judgments based on appearances. As James walked toward the witness stand, Emma leaned closer to Lucy, who was sitting beside her. "Look at that," she whispered, her voice barely audible but tinged with dismissal. "Do you really think someone like him can be trusted to tell the truth about anything important?" Lucy shifted uncomfortably but didn't respond. She had known Emma since childhood and was familiar with her tendency to judge people quickly. But something about the way Emma spoke made her feel uneasy. James took his place at the witness stand with quiet dignity. He placed his right hand on the Bible and raised his left hand, speaking the oath in a clear, steady voice. There was something about his manner that commanded respect, even from those who might have been inclined to dismiss him. The prosecutor began asking James about the events he had witnessed several weeks earlier. It was a serious car accident that had left an elderly man badly injured, and James had been the only witness willing to come forward and testify about what he had seen. As James began to speak, Emma found herself growing more skeptical. In her mind, someone from his background, someone who clearly didn't have money for nice clothes or new shoes, couldn't possibly be reliable enough to provide important testimony in a legal proceeding. Her upbringing in a wealthy family had surrounded her with people who looked and dressed like her, and she had unconsciously learned to distrust those who didn't fit that mold. When James described the details of the accident, Emma let out a quiet laugh. She didn't mean for it to be loud, but in the hushed courtroom, even her soft chuckle seemed to echo. She rolled her eyes and shook her head slightly, convinced that his testimony couldn't be trusted. Judge Patricia Williams, a woman with silver hair and sharp eyes, noticed the disruption from the back of the room. She glanced in Emma's direction with a look that could have frozen water, but she chose to allow the proceedings to continue without addressing the interruption directly. James had heard the laugh, and for just a moment his shoulders tensed, but he didn't turn round or let the disrespect shake his composure. Instead, he continued speaking with the same quiet dignity he had shown from the beginning. His voice remained steady and clear, and his words carried a weight that seemed to grow stronger with each sentence. The accident he was describing hadn't been just any ordinary traffic incident. It had been a moment that changed everything for him. though the people in the courtroom didn't know that yet. The elderly man who had been struck down was someone very special to James, someone who had believed in him when others hadn't. As James continued his testimony, there was something in his voice that began to command attention. Even Emma, despite her prejudices, found herself listening more carefully. He spoke with the kind of honesty that couldn't be faked, the kind of truth that comes from deep personal experience. He was determined to seek justice, not just for the sake of the law, but for something much more personal. No matter what people like Emma might think of him based on his appearance or his background, he would not be deterred from doing what he knew was right. The courtroom seemed to grow quieter as James spoke, as if everyone present was beginning to sense that this young man had something important to say, something that would soon reveal truths that none of them had expected to hear. As James continued speaking from the witness stand, something extraordinary began to unfold in the Manchester courthouse. His voice remained calm and steady, but the information he was sharing became increasingly impressive with each passing minute. Emma found herself leaning forward in her seat, her earlier dismissiveness slowly melting away as she listened to his testimony. James began by recounting the exact time of the accident. It was 3:47 in the afternoon, he said clearly. I remember because I had just checked my phone to see if we were running late. He then provided the complete license plate number of the vehicle involved, reciting each letter and number with perfect accuracy. The prosecutor nodded approvingly as he made notes. But James wasn't finished. He described details that made everyone in the courtroom sit up and take notice. The car was a dark blue sedan, he explained. It had a small dent on the front bumper, about the size of a tennis ball, and there was a scratch along the passenger side door that looked like it might have been made by a key. Emma felt her smile fade completely. These weren't the vague, uncertain statements she had expected from someone she had judged as unreliable. These were the precise observations of someone who had been truly present in the moment. Someone who had seen everything clearly and remembered it perfectly. The defense attorney, Mr. Harrison, had entered the courtroom that morning with obvious confidence. He had reviewed James's background and clearly expected to easily discredit a 17-year-old witness from a poor neighborhood. But as James continued his testimony, Mr. Harrison's confident expression began to change. His shoulders grew tense, and he started shuffling through his papers more frequently. James described the weather conditions with remarkable precision. It had been raining earlier that day, but it had stopped about an hour before the accident. He said the roads were still wet, and I remember thinking that drivers needed to be extra careful. The sun was starting to come out, and it was creating a glare on the wet pavement. He then explained the speed of the vehicles involved. The car that hit Mr. Davies was traveling much faster than the speed limit. James testified, I would estimate it was going at least 40 miles per hour in a 25-mile-per-hour zone. The driver didn't slow down at all when approaching the crosswalk. Every question that Mr. Harrison asked seemed to backfire, instead of revealing inconsistencies or uncertainty. Each inquiry only demonstrated more of James's impressive ability to recall details and his unwavering honesty. His answers were specific, consistent, and delivered with the kind of quiet confidence that comes from telling the absolute truth. Emma watched this transformation with growing amazement. She had spent her entire life surrounded by people who spoke with authority but often lacked substance. Here was someone who had both, real knowledge backed by genuine character. Then James shared something that made Emma's heart skip a beat and brought tears to her eyes. The elderly man who had been struck by the speeding car wasn't just a random victim. His name was Mr. Robert Davies, and he was a retired mathematics teacher who had dedicated his post-retirement years to helping Children in the community. Mr. Davies had been volunteering at the Riverside Community Center for 3 years, James explained, his voice softening with obvious affection. He came in every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon to help kids with their homework. He was particularly good with mathematics, and he was always patient, even when we struggled with difficult problems. James paused for a moment, and Emma could see the emotion in his eyes. On the day of the accident, Mr. Davies had been helping my younger sister Katie with her mathematics homework. She's only 12, and she's always had trouble with fractions. But Mr. Davies had this special way of explaining things that made everything clear. The courtroom was completely silent now, everyone hanging on James's every word. Emma felt ashamed of her earlier laughter, realizing how completely she had misjudged this remarkable young man. James continued his testimony, describing how he had been walking both Mr. Davies and his sister home from the community center. We always walked together because Mr. Davies lived just 2 streets away from us, he said. He never wanted us to walk alone, especially Katie. He said it was his responsibility to make sure we got home safely. The accident had happened right in front of them, at the crosswalk they used every time they walked home. James described how the speeding car had struck Mr. Davies just as he was helping Katie cross the street. The driver had paused for just a moment after the impact, long enough for James to get a clear look at his face, and then had sped away in panic. Mr. Davies was lying on the cold pavement, James said, his voice breaking slightly. He was unconscious, and there was blood. I called for an ambulance while Katie cried beside him. He had been protecting her, making sure she crossed safely. When the car hit him, Emma realized with stunning clarity that her first impressions had been completely wrong. This young man wasn't unreliable or untrustworthy. He was someone with incredible courage. Someone willing to stand up for justice even when it might be easier to stay silent. He was fighting for a man who had shown him and his sister kindness, and he was doing it with a dignity that put her own behavior to shame. The courtroom atmosphere grew even more respectful as James continued to share details about his life that painted a picture of remarkable responsibility and determination. Emma found herself completely absorbed in his story, her earlier prejudices crumbling with each revelation. James explained that he worked 2 jobs to help support his family every morning before school. He helped set up chairs and clean the floors at the Riverside Community Center where Mr. Davies volunteered. It was quiet work that he could do quickly before classes started, and the small payment helped buy groceries for his family after school ended each day. James hurried to his second job at Morrison's grocery store on High Street. He worked there for hours every weekday and 8 hours on Saturdays, stocking shelves, helping customers, and cleaning the store. The work was tiring, but James never complained. He had learned to manage his time carefully, always making sure to finish his homework late at night after his sister Katie had gone to bed, despite juggling these demanding work schedules. James had maintained excellent grades throughout his school years. His teachers often marveled at his ability to stay focused and dedicated to his studies. He was particularly strong in mathematics and history, subjects that Mr. Davies had helped him with during their after-school sessions at the community center. Emma felt her throat tighten as she learned about James's family situation. His father had died in a construction accident 2 years earlier, leaving behind a mountain of medical bills and a family struggling to survive. James had been only 15 years old when he suddenly became the man of the house, taking on responsibilities that most adults would find overwhelming. His mother, Helen Williams, worked as a cleaner at Manchester General Hospital. She was a hard-working woman who often picked up double shifts to earn extra money. But even with her long hours, the family barely had enough to cover rent. utilities, and basic necessities. Helen was proud of her son's strength and maturity, but she worried constantly about the burden he carried at such a young age. James had taken on the responsibility of caring for his younger sister Katie with the same quiet determination he showed in Eve. Everything else, every morning, he made sure she had breakfast and clean clothes for school. Every afternoon, he walked her to the community center where she could get help with her homework while he worked his first day. Every evening, he walked her home safely, making sure she was never alone on the streets of their neighborhood. The relationship between James, Katie, and Mr. Davies had developed naturally over the months they spent together at the community center. The elderly retired teacher had quickly noticed James's intelligence and work ethic, and he had taken a special interest in helping both siblings succeed in school. Mr. Davies had become like a grandfather to them both. He remembered Katie's favorite subjects and always brought extra pencils and notebooks when she needed them. He celebrated James's good grades and encouraged him to dream big about his future. Most importantly, he had given them both something they had lost when their father died: the presence of a caring older man who believed in them. For James, Mr. Davies's support had been life-changing. The old man had spent countless hours helping him prepare for university entrance exams, reviewing practice tests, and explaining difficult concepts with endless patience. When James expressed worry about affording university, Mr. Davies had researched scholarship opportunities and had even written him a detailed letter of recommendation. The letter had been beautifully written, describing James as one of the most responsible and intelligent young men I have ever had the privilege to know. Mr. Davies had highlighted James's work ethic, his dedication to his family, and his potential to make a positive difference in the world. The old man's belief in James had given him hope for a future that had once seemed impossible. Then, the prosecutor revealed information that made Emma's stomach drop. The hit-and-run driver was someone she knew personally: Richard Ashford, a wealthy young man from her own social circle. Richard was the same age as James, but he had lived a completely different life. He had never worked a day in his life, had failed several classes at his expensive private school, and was known for his reckless behavior. On the day of the accident, Richard had been driving his father's expensive BMW without permission. He had been speeding through the neighborhood, probably showing off to friends or simply being careless, when he struck Mr. Davies in the crosswalk. Panic had overtaken him. Instead of stopping to help the injured man, he had looked round quickly and then sped away, leaving Mr. Davies bleeding on the cold pavement. James had immediately knelt beside Mr. Davies, calling his name and checking for signs of life. The old man was unconscious but breathing. James could see that he was badly hurt. With shaking hands, James had called for an ambulance while trying to keep Mr. Davies warm and comfortable. When the ambulance arrived, James had ridden with Mr. Davies to the hospital. He had spent the entire night in the waiting room, holding Katie's hand and praying that their beloved mentor would survive. He had called his mother at work to let her know what had happened, and she had come to the hospital as soon as her shift ended. Emma felt waves of shame wash over her as she realized how completely wrong her assumptions had been. This young man possessed more integrity, courage, and genuine character than most people she knew, including herself. When the judge called for a lunch break, Emma remained in her seat for a moment, feeling overwhelmed by everything she had learned about James during his testimony. The other people in the courtroom began to file out, talking quietly among themselves. About the morning's proceedings, Emma felt too ashamed to face Lucy, who had been giving her disapproving looks throughout James's testimony. Finally, Emma gathered her things and walked out into the courthouse hallway. The building was busy with People coming and going, lawyers meeting with clients, and families gathering in small groups. Emma found herself walking aimlessly, not really hungry despite the lunch break, her mind still processing everything she had heard Dot as she rounded a corner near the courthouse entrance. She spotted James standing by himself near a tall window. He was speaking quietly into his phone, and something about his posture suggested that the conversation was important. Emma didn't mean to eavesdrop, but she found herself slowing down as she passed nearby. James's voice was soft but clear enough for her to hear. "I know, Mom, I know how important the interview is," he was saying, "but I can't leave now. The prosecutor says I need to stay for the afternoon session. And they might call me back to answer more questions from the defense." Emma felt her heart sink as she realized what James was talking about. She remembered hearing during his testimony that he had been accepted for a scholarship interview at Manchester University. This was clearly that interview, and it was happening today. "It's okay, Mom," James continued, his voice gentle and reassuring. "Mr. Davies always told me to do what's right. Even when it's difficult, he would want me to be here, to make sure justice is served. He always said that doing the right thing is more important than doing the easy thing." Emma stopped walking completely now, standing frozen in the hallway as the full weight of James's sacrifice hit her. This scholarship interview wasn't just any appointment. It was his chance to escape poverty and build a better life for himself and his family. The scholarship would cover his university fees, books, and even provide a small living allowance. Without it, James would likely never be able to afford higher education. She listened as James tried to comfort his mother, who was clearly upset about the situation. "I know you're disappointed, Mom, but there will be other opportunities. Maybe they'll let me reschedule, or maybe there's another scholarship program. But right now, I need to be here for Mr. Davies. He can't speak for himself anymore, so I have to speak for him." Emma felt tears welling up in her eyes as she understood the magnitude of what James was giving up. He was choosing to stay and testify, to seek justice for a man who had believed in him, even though it meant potentially sacrificing his own future. The maturity and selflessness of his decision made her feel smaller than she had ever felt in her life. As James ended his phone call, Emma realized she couldn't just walk away. She had to say something, had to acknowledge what she had done and what she had witnessed. Taking a deep breath, she approached him slowly, her expensive heels clicking on the polished floor. James looked up as she approached, and she was struck again by the kindness in his eyes. Even after everything that had happened, even after her disrespectful behavior in the courtroom, he looked at her without anger or judgment. "James," Emma began, her voice trembling slightly, "I owe you an apology. I was wrong to laugh at you, and I'm deeply ashamed of how I behaved in there. You're showing more character than I ever have." She paused, struggling to find the right words. "I made assumptions about you based on how you looked and where you came from, and I was completely wrong. You're one of the most impressive people I've ever met, and I'm sorry it took me so long to see it." James looked at her with surprising understanding. His expression was gentle, without a trace of the anger or resentment she probably deserved. "Thank you for saying that, Miss," he replied quietly. "I hope today helped you see that we shouldn't judge people by how they look or where they come from. We're all just trying to do our best with what we've been given." His response made Emma feel even more ashamed of her behavior, but it also sparked something new in her heart. Here was someone who had every right to be angry with her, yet he was responding with grace and wisdom. His ability to forgive and to find a lesson in the situation showed a maturity that put her own behavior to shame. But James's kindness also inspired something positive in Emma. For the first time in her life, She felt a genuine desire to be better, to use her privilege and resources to help rather than to judge. She realized that she had been given advantages that James had never had, and she had wasted them on superficial things while he had accomplished so much with so little. "Is there anything I can do, Tage?" "Help?" Emma asked, and she meant it sincerely. For the first time in her life, anything at all. James smiled, and his whole face lit up with warmth. "Just remember this feeling," he said simply. "Remember how it felt to realize you had misjudged someone, and maybe help others remember it, too. That's how we make the world a little bit better. One person at a time." 6 months had passed since the transformative day in the Manchester courthouse, and Emma Thompson's life looked completely different from the privileged but shallow existence she had lived before. The encounter with James Williams had sparked a change in her heart that grew stronger with each passing day. Emma had spent weeks after the trial thinking about James's sacrifice and his wisdom. She couldn't stop thinking about how he had given up his scholarship interview to seek justice from Mr. Davies. The memory of his kindness and maturity haunted her in the best possible way, pushing her to examine her own life and values. Using her family's wealth and social connections, Emma had created something she called the Davies-Williams Scholarship Program. The program was designed specifically to help students from underprivileged backgrounds attend university, covering not just tuition fees but also books, living expenses, and even money for professional clothing for job interviews. The first recipient of the scholarship was James Williams himself. Emma had personally contacted Manchester University and arranged for James to have a second interview. When he was accepted, she made sure that every financial barrier was removed from his path to success. James was now studying law with the goal of becoming a solicitor who would fight for justice, particularly for people who couldn't afford expensive legal representation. Emma's weekends looked very different now, too. Instead of shopping at expensive boutiques or attending parties with her wealthy friends, she spent her time volunteering at the Riverside Community Center where James had worked. She helped children with their homework, just as Mr. Davies had done, and she organized educational programs that brought in tutors and mentors from the community. At first, the children at the center had been suspicious of Emma. Her expensive clothes and perfect accent made her seem like an outsider. But Emma had learned patience from James's example, and she worked hard to earn their trust. She learned their names, remembered their favorite subjects, and celebrated their successes with genuine enthusiasm. Emma had also helped organize fundraising events for Mr. Davies, who had thankfully recovered from his injuries. The elderly man had been touched by her efforts and had returned to volunteering at the community center. He and Emma had developed an unexpected friendship, with Mr. Davies often sharing stories about his years as a teacher and his pride in students like James. On a warm Saturday evening in spring, the community center hosted a celebration event for the scholarship program. The main hall was decorated with balloons and banners, and families from throughout the neighborhood had gathered to celebrate the achievements of local students. Emma had spent weeks planning the event, wanting it to be perfect. When it was time for speeches, Emma stood before the crowd, her heart pounding with nervousness. Public speaking had never been difficult for her before, but this was different. This time, she was going to share something deeply personal and honest about her own failures and growth. 6 months ago, I was sitting in a courtroom, and I did something that I will always be ashamed of. Emma began, her voice clear but filled with emotion. I judged a young man based on his appearance and his background, and I was completely wrong. That young man was James Williams, and he taught me one of the most important lessons of my life. Emma paused, looking out at the faces in the audience. She could see James sitting with his family, wearing the university blazer he had earned through his hard work and determination. His mother Helen was already wiping away tears of pride, while his sister Katie was beaming with excitement about her own bright future. I learned that day that character isn't about where you come from or what you wear, Emma continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. It's about how you treat others and what you're willing to sacrifice for what's right. James taught me that true strength comes from standing up for justice, even when it costs you everything. Emma went on to describe how James had given up his scholarship interview to seek justice from Mr. Davies, and how his grace and forgiveness had opened her eyes to her own prejudices. She talked about the importance of looking beyond surface appearances and recognizing the dignity and worth in every person. The audience listened intently, many of them nodding in understanding. Several parents wiped away tears as Emma spoke about the potential that existed in every child, regardless of their circumstances, after the event. As people were saying their goodbyes and cleaning up, James approached Emma with a warm smile that reminded her of their first real conversation in the courthouse hallway. "Thank you for not letting that day in court be the end of your story," James said, his voice filled with genuine appreciation. "You choose to grow from that experience. And that's made all the difference, not just for me, but for all the students who will benefit from this program in the years to come." Emma felt tears in her eyes as she realized how much both of their lives had changed. "I should be thanking you," she replied. "You showed me what real character looks like, and you forgave me when I didn't deserve it." Emma understood now that sometimes our worst moments can become our greatest teachers. The laughter that had once revealed her ignorance and prejudice had become the foundation for a life dedicated to justice and compassion. She had learned that it's never too late to change, never too late to become the person we were meant to be. The end.